I want to welcome you all to the Social Justice Summit at Stony Point Center. We are so glad that you chose to spend your day with us. We'll learn, we'll share, we'll meet new people, we'll network, we'll grow stronger. The world is changing rapidly, as we know. The changes are not good for marginalized people and people of color, queer, non-conforming folks, and so many more. So it is just wonderful to have us all here. Stony Point Center is a place that has always been grounded and founded in social justice, on working to teach leaders to make a way so that all may be welcomed, valued justly, and humanely. Our very first retreat here in 1950, I just want to share just briefly, it featured a leader who was a nurse and was returning from serving in a hospital in India, where she treated Sikh, Muslim, Hindu, and Christian patients. And this was right after the war of Indian division that created Pakistan and India. It was a horrible experience, but there she was treating these folks, and then she came back to tell her story. So even from our first retreat here, we were centered in welcome for everyone, as well as care and justice. So I think us gathering here today, which this weekend also marks our 75th anniversary of being open, is just a great way to do it. As we've transitioned to this new administration, we decided that we needed to do more than just honor our leaders of the past 75 years. We needed to actively engage in supporting social justice here and now, and that's why we're here today. Not going to go on too long. You'll also note that today is a very important day, or this weekend is a very important day. Yesterday, in 1968, the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated. They tried to assassinate a movement, and they didn't do it. It's also, for faith leaders in the room, this is also the weekend on April 9th, 1945, when Dietrich Bonhoeffer was hung by the Nazi regime for being a part of the resistance to what was going on in Europe. They may have killed our leaders, but our call to action did not die. So Stony Point Center continues to stand, in the words of Martin Luther King, to help bend the arc of the moral universe towards justice. So let's get started. I'd like to introduce some leaders. So leading this morning from the Movement for Justice in El Barrio is Juan Haro. Glad to have you here. I don't think they're here yet, but Mary Ellen Whittinghouse-Coos and Melinda Ware from the Opening Doors Institute will be here. And we will have folks from Proyecto Faro. Proyecto Faro is an on-site immigrant supporting immigrant group who has been incredibly active. Liz Roberts and Nelsie Garcia, and there will be more here, but they will be leading us as well as the Reverend Dr. Cornell Edmonds of Covenant Presbyterian Church, or the Church of the UN, will also be with us in leading. Let me introduce our keynote. Leading us this morning and afternoon is our featured keynote speaker, the Reverend West McNeil. So we're really glad to have you here with us. Reverend McNeil is the New York State Labor Religion Coalition Program Director. I hope I said that correctly. They're ordained in the United Church of Christ and have over a decade of experience organizing with community, faith, and labor organizations across New York State. They were named to City and State's Faith Power 100 list of New York's most influential religious leaders. Okay. Whew. Little excitement going on there. Wes holds an MDiv from Union Theological Seminary in New York City, a BA in journalism from Ithaca College, and is a graduate of the Union Leadership Institute of the New York State, AFL, CIO, and Cornell. So I give you my friend West.
Good morning. Thank you so much, Brian, for that introduction and the invitation to be here. Can you hear me okay? Oh, there, it's picking it up now. Okay. Yeah, I'm really honored and excited to be here and to get to spend some time together today, really trying to cultivate and strengthen and deepen our connections and our capacity and ability to be building a stronger movement for social justice. I really believe that one of the most important things that we can be doing in this moment is building and deepening our relationships across the different organizations and issues that we work on, and across the many different lines of division that have been exploited by our opponents throughout history to weaken us and to confuse us. And by that, I mean divisions based on race, age, religion, sexual orientation, nationality, etc. My hope is that our time together today can help to plant and nurture seeds of solidarity that can continue to bear fruit in this coming period. And I want to really appreciate the role that Stony Point Center is seeking to play to help facilitate these connections, because it is really, really important, critical work. So as you heard in my introduction, I'm both a minister and an organizer. I grew up in the United Methodist Church and was a United Methodist parish minister for a couple of years in Washington State. I left because of their discriminatory policies toward LGBTQ clergy, and was ordained in the United Church of Christ. And for the last 10 years, my ministry has been as an organizer and as the director of the New York State Labor Religion Coalition. Our mission is to unite labor, faith, and community in a statewide movement for social, racial, and economic justice, grounded in our deeply held moral and democratic values. And that work takes on multiple forms, including organizing around state level policies like strengthening the safety net and taxing the ultra wealthy in New York. It involves education and training for community and faith leaders to engage in social justice work, and also involves connecting groups and leaders from different communities around the state. And earlier this year, Labor Religion Coalition became a program of the Keynote Center for Religions, Rights, and Social Justice after many years of working really closely together. The mission of the Keynote Center is to raise up generations of religious and community leaders committed to building a movement to end poverty, led by the poor and open to all. And one of the things Keynote Center is most known for, that you may know it for, is co-anchoring the Poor People's Campaign, a national call for moral revival, which our executive director and Presbyterian minister, Reverend Liz Theo-Harris, co-chairs with Reverend William Barber. As you may know, that campaign launched in 2018, around the 50th anniversary of the Poor People's Campaign that Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was organizing at the time of his death. And as we reflect on this anniversary yesterday of the assassination of Dr. King, I think it's helpful to reflect on the insights and the example that he set, which is still so relevant almost 60 years ago to this time. And as you may know, 58 years ago, on April 4th, 1967, Dr. King spoke at Riverside Church in New York City and gave what is now known as his Beyond Vietnam speech. It was a year to the day before he was assassinated. And in that last year of King's life, when he came out forcefully against the Vietnam War and began to organize that original Poor People's Campaign, his work during that time is a lot less familiar to many Americans than his work and words from the late 1950s and 1960s, earlier 1960s. Mainstream culture doesn't like to talk as much about this part of King's legacy, when he was much more explicitly confronting the very roots of our economic system and confronting the war machine. King himself described his change of orientation at this time as a shift from civil rights to human rights. He recognized that the victories of the civil rights movement had integrated Black Americans into a fatally flawed system. In May of 1967, Dr. King said in a speech to his staff, We have been in a reform movement, but after Selma and the Voting Rights Bill, we moved into a new era, which must be the era of revolution. We must recognize that we can't solve our problem now until there is a radical redistribution of economic and political power. This Beyond Vietnam speech was a speech that some of his friends and allies really did not want him to give. They predicted that coming out against the war would invite a backlash from the politicians and newspapers and other elites who had finally started to become allies on civil rights. And their warnings were right. There was a heavy cost to the choice Dr. King made to tell the truth about Vietnam. But he did it because he knew there actually was no other choice. First of all, as a Christian, he believed he could not be silent in the face of the immorality of the United States' actions in Southeast Asia. He said in that speech, "Because I believe that God is deeply concerned, especially for God's suffering and helpless and outcast children, I come tonight to speak for them. This I believe to be the privilege and the burden of all of us who deem ourselves bound by allegiances and loyalties which are broader and deeper than nationalism, and which go beyond our nation's self-defined goals and positions. We are called to speak for the victims of our nation, for those it calls enemy. For no document from human hands can make these humans any less our brothers and sisters." In addition to that basic moral conviction, Dr. King knew that we can't tackle what he called the triplets of racism, materialism, and militarism in isolation from each other. The war in Vietnam was taking United States resources and attention away from the war on poverty. And because of white supremacy, Black soldiers were killed in Vietnam at a disproportionate rate. And Dr. King understood that fundamentally it was the poor of all races of the United States who were being sent to kill and to be killed by the poor in Vietnam. King preached that all these issues are tied together and perpetuated by our nation's sick and distorted morality. We as a nation must undergo a radical revolution of values, King said in that speech. We must rapidly begin the shift from a thing-oriented society to a person-oriented society. When machines and computers, profit motives, and property rights are considered more important than people, the giant triplets of racism, materialism, and militarism are incapable of being conquered. A true revolution of values will soon look uneasily on the glaring contrast of poverty and wealth. A nation that continues year after year to spend more money on military defense than on programs of social uplift is approaching spiritual death. Hearing these words 58 years later, one has to ask, how much further has our nation traveled down the road to spiritual death? I grew up in the 80s and 90s at a time when the dominant narrative in this country was one that developed in many ways as a backlash to kings. That narrative challenged the idea that poor people should have access to a decent life. It caricatured poor people, especially Black and brown poor people, as welfare queens and accused them of living too well on the taxpayer's dime. It didn't matter that in reality, these programs benefited mostly white people, or that the actual cost of welfare programs accounted for a tiny fraction of the taxes Americans pay. The narrative stuck. And for 40 years, it was wielded effectively to eliminate benefits and add more and more strings to the ones that remained. Today, only 20% of poor families with children receive temporary aid for needy families, which is the program that replaced welfare in 1996. Prior to welfare reform, which was enacted by President Bill Clinton, more than 80% of poor families with children received cash assistance. And as we know, welfare is not the only public program that was targeted. Over the last 4 decades, we've seen almost every kind of public good targeted for disinvestment, from libraries to public hospitals, to fire stations, to parks and schools. Our communities have to tighten our belts, we're told. There just isn't enough to go around. But meanwhile, over that same period of time, the wealth and income of the very richest has exploded. In 1980, here in New York State, for example, 12% of all income went to the top 1% of earners. By 2015, the top 1% took home 1/3 of all income in the state. Just a few days ago, Forbes came out with its annual billionaires list and reported that the total wealth held by billionaires worldwide grew by almost $2 trillion just in the past year. The US is home to 902 of those billionaires. The number of poor and low-income Americans, on the other hand, is close to 140 million. Getting close to half of us are either in poverty or one emergency away from it. And so we could say that over the last half century, there has been a radical redistribution of economic and political power, but in the wrong direction. The trends that Dr. King saw and warned against continued and even worsened after he was killed. And this is the context out of which Donald Trump and the world's richest billionaire, Elon Musk, ascended to the Oval Office this past January. Decades of austerity and an accelerating flow of wealth from the bottom to the top, a process facilitated by both Democrats and Republicans, helped to lay the groundwork for this moment. Growing poverty and inequality helped create the conditions where demagogues could fan the flames of nativism, white supremacy, and misogyny. And now extremists at the very center of our government are blatantly undermining democracy and rapidly moving us toward authoritarianism. As Dr. King saw and articulated so clearly, the triplet evils of racism, poverty, and militarism lead not only to physical, material destruction and death, they cause a spiritual death as well. A thing-oriented society leaves the people living in it lonely and isolated and fighting each other to survive. As we take stock of this present moment, it's critical to see our current situation in this longer and larger context. The prescription for the cure rests with the accurate diagnosis of the disease, Dr. King wrote in 1967. The results of the November election are a symptom, not the disease itself. And that means we need a solution much bigger than the next elections if we're to emerge from this dangerous crisis. So what might that look like? Again, I believe that Dr. King has insights that we would do well to hear. In March 1968, just a few weeks before he was assassinated, Dr. King addressed a multiracial group of leaders that had met to begin planning the Poor People's Campaign. He said to them, "It has been one of my dreams that we would come together and realize our common problems. Power for poor people will really mean having the ability, the togetherness, the assertiveness, and the aggressiveness to make the power structure of this nation say yes when they may be desirous to say no." This dream of Dr. King's that the poor and marginalized of this nation, white, Black, Latino, Native American, Asian, from every kind of community in every region, this dream that they would all come together and realize our common problems has never been fully realized. And part of the crisis we are facing today is one of disconnection, both within communities and between communities. The Surgeon General last year warned of an epidemic of loneliness. And one of the consequences of the disinvestment in public goods has been disinvestment in the places and programs that bring people together and build a sense of community. So that is one of our challenges in this moment, to rebuild the fabric of society, to build places for people to come together. And this dream of Dr. King's, that the poor and marginalized of this nation would come together and realize our common problems, is still necessary, and it's still possible. And maybe now more than ever. As we know all too well, our people and our communities are hurting. And we can expect that conditions are about to get worse. But we can also expect that more and more people will be compelled to act on behalf of themselves and their families and their neighbors. Today, there are nearly 1,000 hands-off actions happening in communities all over the country, protesting cuts to the safety net and mass layoffs of workers and the kidnapping and deportation of immigrants and much more. And there are also people all over in communities like yours and mine who have already been helping each other get by in times of crisis. They have been running mutual aid networks, taking care of each other's kids, holding community meals, responding to natural disasters, hosting Know Your Rights trainings for vulnerable populations. Meeting people's material and emotional and spiritual needs and building community are also examples of resistance and resilience in these times. My colleagues, Shally Barnes and Jarvis Benson at the Kairos Center, recently published a report called A Matter of Survival, which was based on more than 40 interviews with grassroots leaders who organized different projects of survival to sustain their communities through the COVID-19 pandemic and beyond. In it, they look back to the example of the Underground Railroad. The Underground Railroad was made up of thousands of stops where everyday people offered what they could to facilitate their fellow human beings' passage to freedom. And when all of the station stops were linked up together, they formed a powerful constellation that helped topple the slaveholding aristocracy of the American South. In their report, Shally and Jarvis challenge us to see how community-based survival projects could be nodes of a network that, when linked together, can be a foundation for a movement that can build and assert power for poor and dispossessed people. Today, as we sit here, there are people all over this country coming together around their common problems. Some are out in the streets protesting. Some are stocking the shelves of their neighborhood food pantry. Some are planting seeds in a community garden. Some are helping a woman cross state lines to access reproductive health care, or hiding an immigrant student activist from ICE agents. Each of you are here today because you are part of, or perhaps looking to become part of, an organization or a project that in some way is helping bring people together. We know that today, as we sit here, there are also people all across our country who are feeling isolated and lonely and hopeless, who may not know where to turn to get their next meal, or to hear the truth about what is happening, or to get connected to an action. And so our task is to find those people and invite them in to the communities we are part of and building, to invite them to find how they share in common problems with their neighbors, both near and far. And in all of these efforts where we're bringing communities together, talking about our problems, exploring solutions to them, we're holding seeds of a more powerful movement. If we can link up together, if we can recognize the common intertwined roots of our sometimes different problems, if we can experiment and practice taking action together, if we can cultivate the ability, the togetherness, the assertiveness, and the aggressiveness, then we will make the power structure of this nation say yes to housing, to healthcare, to education. We will make it say yes to jobs and to peace. We will make it say yes to immigrants and refugees, to trans and queer folks, and people of all races. We will make it say yes to clean water and air, and to a sustainable environment. Our power will make that power structure say yes, even when they may be desirous to say no. Thank you.
Thank you, Est. Wow, what a story, what a legacy that we follow. So many people before us.